Hi there, I'm Adam Leventhal. Welcome to the preview on the Athletic FC. Liverpool against Manchester City is centre stage this week. Plus, we'll be getting you ready for all of the rest of the weekend's Premier League action. It's hello to Tim Spears. How are you, Tim?
I'm okay. How are you, Adam?
I'm very well. We have someone who's not regularly on the show alongside us, and that is senior football writer Tim, Ollie Kay. How are you, Ollie?
Yeah, I'm not feeling quite as old as that makes me sound, but yeah, I'm very well, thank you. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here.
Exactly. Yeah, quite right. It's good to have you on the show. Let's just quickly tee up what we have this weekend as far as the Premier League fixtures. It's a 1-5-4 from Friday. We have an FNF, and that is Brighton against Southampton. Then 4 Saturday 3pms, Wolves Bournemouth, Palace against Newcastle, Forest Ipswich and Brentford Leicester. Then at 5:30 it is West Ham against Arsenal. Moving on to Sunday 1:30, it's Tottenham against Fulham, Manchester United Everton and Chelsea against Villa. Then the big one to finish, Liverpool against Manchester City at 4:30. And we'll start at Anfield. So let's start with Manchester City then. That 4-0 defeat against Spurs last weekend made it 3 Premier League defeats in a row. And that's as many as they'd lost in their previous 47. The last time they lost 4 in a row was back in 2008, Tim. And then following on that, you had capitulation against Feyenoord, that 3-0 lead. Then it finished 3-3. What do you call this for Manchester City now? Is it a blip? Is it a worry? Is it a problem? Is it a crisis? What are you pinning on it?
I think you have to call it a head scratcher, don't you, Adam?
Oh yes, quite.
It's it kind of felt like last weekend was surely them hitting rock bottom. What felt like a real seismic result. I said earlier in the week, it kind of felt like you know those sort of end of an era games that you very, very rarely get in the Premier League, like Villa beating Liverpool 7-2, and it kind of signalled the end of the reigning champions Liverpool at the time under Klopp, or when Newcastle beat Man United 5-0 way back in the day, and it kind of Man United went on to win the title that season, but it felt like the reigning champions been dethroned, and that's how it felt like last week, especially when the fourth goal went in. But you kind of think this is rock bottom. They got Feyenoord at home to come in the week, and then they'll be up for Liverpool and probably put in a much improved performance. But I actually think the game against Feyenoord on Tuesday was probably the worst thing that's happened to them in the past month, or certainly the most un-City-like thing to have happened. To be for them of all teams to be 3-0 up with 15 minutes to go and not win. Not only does that not happen to City, that doesn't happen to anyone. That's never happened in the Champions League, that a team has been 3-0 up that late in a game and not won. So it's incredibly unprecedented. And the sort of the reasons and the excuses are running out now. Tuesday was nothing to do with injuries. You can't say that just because Rodri wasn't there, that's why it happened. So yeah, it's an absolutely sort of fascinating thing to have happened. It's great for the Premier League. It's great for all of us, to have this totally unexpected development with City. But they were doing really, really weird things on Tuesday. They were still defending on the halfway line in the 92nd minute when they're 3-2 up, and confidence is completely gone. But they've sort of lost their heads a bit, really. So yeah, like I said, extremely interesting for the Premier League. No one foresaw this happening at all. And that makes what's going to happen next even harder to predict, I guess.
What's your take on it, Ollie?
I think you can look at various factors and look at the absence of Rodri and look at the absence of Ruben Dias over the last month, and individual struggles for players like Foden and Grealish and Kyle Walker and others who haven't got back to their best at all. I mean, in Grealish's case, that's something of an ongoing struggle. Walker's case, you might say it's a sort of ongoing slow decline. Foden's case, you're thinking, well, what? He was so good in the closing months of last season. Is it a hangover for the Euros? Is it something else? But the overall thing, I think you have to look at it as a major psychological issue. You can look at technical issues within the team and structural issues, and think, could they be doing this better? Could they be doing that better? Coaches always talk about, being more compact and so on. But if you look at the last 4 games, there's been an element of psychological collapse to all 4 of those. They were playing well. They're 1-0 up in Lisbon away to Sporting, and somehow lost that game 4-1. They were playing well in the first half at Brighton, 1-0 up, looked like they were back on track. They lose that game, 2 goals, could see 2 goals in 5 minutes later on. Then there was the 4-0, 4-0 against Spurs, having started the game well, then conceded the first goal, collapsed. 3-0 up on Tuesday night, somehow collapsed in the closing stages. It's like you just need to give them the slightest prod at the moment, and they're crumbling. And I think Liverpool will do more than just the occasional prod. Liverpool will think, well, we've got this chance to go 11 points clear of them. We've got the chance to finish them off in terms of the title race this season. Liverpool will smell blood, and they will go for them. And City have to do something very, very different, not just technically, tactically, but they have to stand together and stand firm for 90 minutes, because as they've shown over the last 6 games, but particularly the last 4 games, they look vulnerable when they're attacked.
And Tim, they're going to a place, Manchester City, that they don't like going. They've not had much success at Anfield, just 1 win in their last 21. They haven't won there with fans. They won during COVID, but with fans since May 2003. Is it still feasible for them to be in the category of a wounded animal? And if you imagine Manchester City as a wounded animal and then coming back with all their capabilities, then that would be very, very dangerous indeed. Or do you think it's more grave than that they're not wounded? They're a sort of, well, they're not a dead animal. But what I'm saying is, can they still come back from this? Do you think that they can be rejuvenated?
What animal are they? You keep saying wounded. What kind of animal?
Well, I don't know. You think, well, when you think of a wounded animal, I think of a lion.
No,
what do you think?
I was going to say horse. Don't know why I just popped in
a horse.
Yeah.
Okay.
No idea why. Yeah, a good question. I think in there somewhere. And yeah, the answer would be there are key players who are bang out of form at the moment. Guardiola gave Spurs, but 2 big errors for Tottenham's first 2 goals last Sunday, and then it was this comedy back pass that got Feyenoord's comeback going on Tuesday night. So you'd pinpoint him as one who's really out of form. You'd definitely pinpoint Haaland as another. I think we have to say that his goals were hiding some of these weaknesses, which have now become very apparent. Not to someone like Sam Lee, who's been saying all season that City are out of sorts, but Haaland's goals were getting him out of trouble. You look at his last, I think it's 8 expected goals, and he's only scored 2. So he's bang out of form, and he missed quite a few chances, particularly against Spurs, that you would expect someone of his calibre to finish. So there's
he came close against Spurs, though, didn't he? On another day, he could have actually had a hat-trick.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. He could have. I remember thinking when it was 3-0 that if he was Haaland at his very best, it still would have been 4-3 to City, So it's not disastrous here. But you also have to say, Adam, this is a reversal in results, but not a reversal in form. If you look at the league games preceding this run, they were outplayed by Fulham at home, but sort of scraped through. They got their 95th minute winner at Wolves when they were poor that day, and then they beat Southampton 1-0. Again, that was another poor performance. Those were the victories preceding this against 3 pretty average or poor teams. So the signs were there, but they're so soft in the middle. They're so easy to play through, which is not something you could say about City before. That is an injury thing with sort of Rodri and Kovacic, but they're also, I've not seen many leaders there. I think I mentioned the high line earlier against Feyenoord in the 92nd minute. If Vincent Kompany was in the centre of defence, there's no way he'd be saying, yeah, let's defend on the halfway line and allow a simple ball over the top to completely expose us. So there are issues short term and there are issues long term. We spoke about this last week, how it's an ageing squad that needs transforming. So yeah, lots of issues, short and long term.
Ollie, obviously, Tim's highlighted there that Manchester City have looked soft in places, which feels weird saying it, to be brutally honest. But then I suppose they will be looking at Liverpool who had some troubles against Southampton, and think, look, we can do things to Liverpool as well, because they've shown vulnerabilities.
They have shown vulnerabilities. They were poor in the first half on, I'd say poor for the first hour at Southampton last Sunday, but you always thought that even at 2-1 down, you thought, well, they'll get a goal in the next 10 minutes. They were building up ahead of steam. I felt all along they would win that game, and that wasn't always the case when watching them last season. It was frequently the case because they had a few similar sort of comebacks from sort of scratchy first hours last season. But it felt on Sunday, look, they will win. They're very sure of themselves at the moment. The defending wasn't great. I'd say they didn't have the same sort of control as they've generally had under Arne Slot. So there are certainly weaknesses there and areas that City might feel that they could pinpoint if they can get their own house in order. That's the difficulty, isn't it? City need to go there and dominate possession the way they perhaps did in the first half of that game last season, but even then, having done that, they ended up sort of clinging on for dear life in the second half. It's really difficult. Liverpool have got potentially a couple of injuries in defence, but they've likely got Trent Alexander-Arnold coming back, so that's sort of not a bad stand-in for Conor Bradley, is it? There are certainly areas where City might think, well, if Konate's out, maybe Erling Haaland doesn't have quite such a difficult afternoon. Maybe because Konate's been played brilliantly. He went off late on the other night, and it's not yet clear whether he'll be fit for Sunday or not. But if he is, he'll be a big miss because he's been playing brilliantly. And I think City will feel they need to. If there are any weaknesses in this Liverpool backline or in the Liverpool midfield, they have to expose them when they're on top, when they've got the ball, because there will be periods in the second half, no doubt, on Sunday when they will find themselves under siege, and they need to be a lot stronger than they have been lately, City.
Okay, let's hear from Tom Harris, who's one of our tactical analysts at The Athletic, and he's been speaking on the Athletic Tactics podcast on what will be an intriguing tactical battle on Sunday.
I think one of the things to look out for is perhaps if Liverpool do approach this game pressing in a 4-2-4 shape, as we've seen recently from them, then Pep did seem to have a bit of an idea to combat that early in the season against Chelsea. He moved Kevin De Bruyne out into the wider space in the build-up, and the benefit of that is that when you're pressing in a 4-2-4 shape, the four attacking players are blocking the passes into the midfield. But when you've got De Bruyne there, you've got to make a decision then. Does one of that front four drop to pick up De Bruyne? And then you lose the benefit of having the four players in the front line in the first place. Does a midfielder move across and then you're light in the midfield? Does a defender move up? It creates problems for that pressing system. And especially when you've got somebody like De Bruyne, his quality in those wide areas, that could be something that could potentially be a bit of a tactical theme in this game. But you also have to say that Liverpool and Arne Slot have tweaked their out of possession structure quite a lot this season. I think they did it against Leipzig was a good example. They did it against Chelsea actually when they came to Anfield. Chelsea were having a little bit of joy with that system, and then they switched to a 4-1-4-1 and they looked a little bit more solid. So I think Slot will have answers to that, but I think obviously City have been very poor in the individual duels recently. They've been very open, but I think if Kevin De Bruyne in particular, we've not seen the best out of him, I must admit, in the last season or so. If he can turn up, if he can get Foden into the game, if he can get Haaland into the game, obviously there's still a chance that they can come away with something.
So De Bruyne could be key for Manchester City, Tim. One man who could well be looking forward to this game in particular, due to Manchester City's frailties and the opportunity to sort of catch them with balls in behind, is Trent Alexander-Arnold, who was on the bench against Real Madrid, but he missed the game before against Southampton. But Arne Slot has confirmed, as Ollie mentioned, that he is fit to start. Do you see him slotting in and enjoying this game in particular?
Yeah, potentially. I think City will play a little bit differently in terms of how they set up. But yeah, you're right. Those balls over the top, or I mentioned earlier, the weakness with Guardiola at left back. These are areas that Alexander-Arnold will look to exploit. But yeah, there was certainly a couple of warning signs for Liverpool against Southampton last weekend. Defensively, yeah, they were pretty suspect. I don't know if it's sort of post-international break, which they've had issues with before, but yeah, they certainly couldn't handle Onuachu, and they couldn't handle Dibbling either. It was quite a patchy performance with some pretty rare defensive weaknesses. I mean, their record's been outstanding this season at the back, so it's a hard one to explain. But you'd expect them to lift their levels on Sunday for sure.
So, Ollie, you mentioned before Konate picking up that knock against Real Madrid. So obviously, if he's missing, that's a big loss for Liverpool. But others, you feel in this Arne Slot setup and having Virgil van Dijk just sort of looking after whoever's alongside him, you don't feel that it's going to be a massive issue?
Well, I think it's a big issue in the sense that Konate has been absolutely outstanding this season. He was on the bench for the first game of the season. I think Jarell Quansah had impressed Arne Slot more in pre-season, than he had a difficult 45 minutes against Ipswich, and Konate came in and has been there ever since, and he has been absolutely outstanding, and was again on that right hand side of defence with Conor Bradley against Real Madrid. It was a fantastic performance. He's big tests over the last few weeks, and he's come through every one of them really. So it's he will be a big miss if he's absent. I think he would be more. He and Van Dijk would sound like a more the kind of partnership that Erling Haaland might not enjoy playing against. Whereas if it was Joe Gomez, not saying Joe Gomez is a poor player by any means, or Jarell Quansah, Haaland might feel like he can get a bit more joy in the physical battles against those two, perhaps. But it's I think Konate, they will be hoping Konate is fit, or failing that he's not out for long, because although Liverpool have some very good backup options in that area, Konate has without doubt reasserted himself as the ideal partner for Van Dijk.
One person, Tim, that Liverpool can't replace, especially at the moment, is Mo Salah. We'll come on to his future in a moment, but do you think that this is almost the best version that we're seeing of him so far in the Premier League, or am I just getting carried away with myself?
It's as good as, I think. The numbers speak for themselves. I think it's 12 goals in 19 in all comps this season. Dragging Liverpool through games, a real sort of talismanic figure. And yeah, again, I'm going to mention Guardiola being City's weak link at the moment, and you'd pinpoint that as a key battle, with Guardiola so out of form defensively, to the extent where maybe Pep switches it up and maybe switches Rico Lewis there, or does something different with Kyle Walker or with Nathan Ake, because that, on current form, that is such a one-sided contest that you'd fear for City. But yeah, Salah, I think, with his sort of bringing his levels back up to what they were sort of, what feels like about 5 years ago now. There's been a bit of talk this week about all-time Premier League greats, and where does he now stand now that he's adding longevity, to his brilliance, and his numbers keep going up and up in sort of the all-time Premier League tables in terms of goals and assists. I think he probably gets into my all-time Premier League 11 now, Adam. You'll be pleased to hear.
Oh.
I think so.
Do you keep that sort of updated?
Yes. Yeah. I've got a journal. I think there's slightly less competition for the right wing slot in a 4-3-3 than there would be on the left, where you'd maybe be looking at like Ronaldo and Henry on that side.
You really do, don't you? This is something. It's an ongoing piece of work.
Well, Shearer's in the middle. You can't really argue with that. So it's probably Shearer in the middle. I think Henry on the left, and Salah would be on the right for me.
Okay. Do you want to run us through the rest or not?
We'll save it for next week.
Okay, good. Okay, I'll generate that for next week. says Tim.
Wayne Hennessy.
Exactly. In terms of how Manchester City have been defending, counter-attacks. I mean, Tim's mentioned it earlier on. Playing that high line against Feyenoord, even when they were sort of still defending that narrow lead. This is perfect for Mo Salah in particular, and for Liverpool, isn't it, Ollie?
Yeah, it is. I mean, when Tim mentioned the fact that they were still defending on the halfway line at sort of 3-1 and 3-2 in the closing stages on Tuesday night. I mean, it doesn't surprise me because that's the way they play. That's the only way they know. Historically, traditionally, you would always say with a team when they're really clinging on to something, drop a bit deeper. But modern teams don't really do that. I mean, maybe they do if they're playing Liverpool or Manchester City away from home and they're clinging on to 1-0 lead. Maybe in those situations a team drops deeper. But when it's Manchester City and they're playing a style of football that's made them so dominant for so long, they don't really have it in them to drop deeper and deeper and deeper, or even drop 10 yards back. That they simply do defend on the halfway line. That's the way they play, and they try to dominate possession, and they try to make sure that if they lose the ball, they win it back extremely quickly. But that isn't working at the moment. And what was, if you look back at, for example, the great Manchester United teams of the 90s and 2000s, if they had a wobble, a 3 or 4 game wobble, which certainly happened from time to time, it probably generally happened once a season, but then they would really go sort of almost back to basics, and they would be that caged animal, and they would really just work on the basics of football to, as Fabian Delph would famously put it in that City dressing room. And it's probably harder to do that when your playing style is much more complex, much more front foot, much more dogmatic as opposed to pragmatic. I wouldn't really expect Guardiola to say, right, okay, straight lines, 4-4-2, we stay compact, we drop back 20 yards. They're not going to do that. So they are going to play the same way, I would assume. And it is a style which you would think would suit Liverpool if Liverpool can get the ball, and Liverpool can get the ball into those key areas behind the fullbacks, behind the centre backs. It's they don't, over the last few weeks in particular, the City don't seem to have the ability really, or the mindset to just go back to basics. So I think they will leave gaps in the same areas unless Guardiola is to do something majorly different tactically, maybe 3 at the back or 5 at the back. I don't see that happening, but if they don't, it will be the same mindset, same spaces that they leave, and Liverpool will just try to exploit them. And Salah in particular will think, I'm going to enjoy trying to get behind that defence.
And Tim, just on Salah, he's obviously got that fire in his belly, just on a sporting level, but also he is fighting for a sort of a greater cause because he's out of contract. He's said, after the game last weekend, I'm more out than I am in. Do you see this becoming a distraction? Do you see the Liverpool hierarchy actually going, right, we need to nail this down because he's sort of now exposing us in public? How do you see it panning out, this one?
Well, they need to sort it out soon because, he's a free agent fairly soon. So, yeah, there is a time-pressing issue. I mean, it's a story as old as time, Adam. Player wants more money, player wants a new contract, player plays very well until he gets what he wants. And now he's added a bit more pressure sort of publicly. I don't agree that I think it was Jamie Carragher said it was selfish. I don't agree with that at all. If he wasn't delivering on the pitch, then it might be a different issue. But it was cheeky, He went out of his way to do it. I think he stopped in the mix zone 3 times in 7 years. So it was obviously very deliberate, something he's had on his mind. And I don't think it's that bad. It's strange that Liverpool have left it this late to sort out, the same as Van Dijk and Trent Alexander-Arnold, arguably their 3 best players. Obviously, I'm not aware of the sort of the specific details of the contract talks, and whether Salah's asking for more money or not, I don't know. But if he's asking for sort of, give me the same money for another couple of years, I really wouldn't see an issue with that. He's 32. I think he's one of those that could probably play at a very high level until he's 37, 38. Certainly look at his recent form. He's not slowing down. He's not a player who, obviously his pace is important, but doesn't specifically rely on his pace. I think he's got quite a few more years left in him. So to sort of say, yeah, this is what I'm worth, give me more of the same for another 2-3 years, doesn't feel out of the question to me. So he's probably, well, obviously he's frustrated and it's come out in public. But no, I don't see it being an issue, Adam, no.
And obviously he's taking the focus because he is the talisman. But Ollie, on the other two, it's weird with Virgil van Dijk and Trent Alexander-Arnold. It's almost as if people have not forgotten about them, but they're being taken out of the spotlight. But arguably they're as important as him, or do you not see it that way?
I think all three of them are extremely important. To Liverpool's to where Liverpool play, to their prospects this season, to their prospects next season. I think they would all be extremely difficult to replace. If you look at if you say who would be who would be the biggest loss, I think in some ways it will be Alexander-Arnold, because although he's a right back, which is not position traditionally a role where someone dominates a team and it's not normally the team's most important player. But he's only 26. He's homegrown. He's got sort of, in an ideal situation, Liverpool would retain him for his whole career. That's generally the desire in these circumstances. And he's a guy who, if he, in normal circumstances, if Liverpool was selling him on the open market, if he had 2 or 3 years left on his contract, you'd be talking about an enormous transfer fee. Perhaps, I don't know, 80 million, 100 million more. I don't know. It's a kind of player that just, if Liverpool were trying to replace him, I think that's extremely difficult. But likewise with Van Dijk and Salah, they're both at an age where, yes, you would normally say, well, they're going to be in decline now. They're going to be playing less and less. And that was the case with, for example, John Terry at Chelsea, Frank Lampard at Chelsea, people like Rio Ferdinand and Ryan Giggs and Paul Scholes at Manchester United, true greats of the Premier League. And they were declining. Steven Gerrard, by a similar age, was declining, all but bar one season. He was playing a lot less frequently by this stage of his career. But you look at Salah and Van Dijk, and they are still performing to an extremely high level, not just when called upon, but week in, week out. That might not be the case in 2 years, but right now you'd think, well, for another 18 months or so, they look just a safe bet. Van Dijk is probably performing at a level that no 33-year-old central defender has done previously in the Premier League. I would say the same of Salah in terms of 32-year-old wingers. I don't remember Ryan Giggs ever producing these type of numbers, but particularly not at this stage of his career. He was more sort of in and out of the team, performing a much more kind of restrained role in the team almost by this stage of his career, whereas Salah is just sort of tearing it up week after week. So I think Liverpool are going to have to question their own position on it. I totally understand the logical argument that these guys are going to go in decline and that you can't keep paying them at the same level that you might, you can't give Salah another 4 years at the same level, for example. But at the moment, Salah looks like he would be an awful lot more expensive to replace, and Van Dijk likewise, than he would be to keep.
I'm going to get your predictions now. It's a 2-part prediction. Tim, first of all, score prediction, please, from you.
Oh, blimey. Well, what's the second part?
I'm not going to tell you yet.
That's secret. Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I think I'd say it depends which stat do you want, Adam? Do you want Liverpool have only won one of their last 9 in the league against City, or do you want Liverpool have only won, or do you want Man City have only won one of their last 21 away at Liverpool? So they're both in bad form against each other, apparently. Mm-hmm. It's certainly more. I think it's a more important game for City to win in terms of the title. Obviously, Liverpool have won 10 of their first 12 in the Premier League. Only 2 teams have done that and not won the league in Premier League history.
All right, Stat Pack, get on with it. What's the score going to be?
1-1.
1-1. Was that?
Mm-hmm.
1-1. Okay, Ollie, what's your score prediction?
I would say Liverpool. 3-1. But the interesting thing is when Tim says it's a more important game for City to win, and I agree in terms of the league table, but I think if you offered both teams a draw now, I think City would be the one that would be shaking on it, and Liverpool would think, no. Twist, please.
Yeah.
I think Liverpool will feel they've got an opportunity to inflict a knockout blow on City, and it might not be that, but it would certainly feel like that if by Sunday evening they're 11 points clear of City.
So that was going to be my second question. If it is an 11-point gap, Ollie, presumably you're saying that that's Manchester City completely out of the title race. Is it also Liverpool's title done and dusted there and then?
Well, Liverpool haven't really played anyone yet, have they? No. That was doing the rounds a month or so ago, and I think people like me were saying, we'll see where Liverpool are at by the end of November, because by then, they'll have had all these tough games in the Champions League, Real Madrid, and so on, and they had this what looked like a really, really tough run of games between the October international break and now, really. But still a long way to go, isn't there? It will be a big gap at this stage of the season, but there would, I think, still be the expectation that they were going to have a blip at some point, and then it's a question of how you respond to that. And in the case of City, it's been their failure to respond to the blip that's turned it into something worse. And so that's always the question: how do you deal with that those first couple of setbacks? And Liverpool seem to be kicking that question into the long grass very successfully.
Tim, you've obviously said it's a draw, so the points gap wouldn't change. But do you think that City, and that therefore City would still be in the title race in your eyes?
Yeah, as Ollie says, a blip will come for Liverpool, and City are still, despite what's happened in the last month, the one team capable of going to win 15 games in a row. So yeah, it does feel extremely pivotal, and it sort of goes without saying, but if one team wins, it's either going to be 11 points or 5 points. The difference, the swingometer there, Jon Snow would love that, to be honest. So yeah, it does feel pretty pivotal. I think if Liverpool win, 11 points is too much for any team to overhaul.
So if Liverpool win against Manchester City, and that may well rule City out of the title race, it may well be Liverpool's title to throw away. We're going to need someone else to challenge Liverpool. And where is that going to come from? Will it be the likes of Arsenal, Chelsea? Let's deal with those two teams now. Chelsea take on Aston Villa, who aren't in a great run of form. Do you see Chelsea sort of sustaining this challenge, Tim? Because I remember right at the beginning of the season, you did say that they were a mess and they're probably going to stay a mess. Have they surprised you? You did say that. Did I say that? Stay a mess.
Well,
you didn't. You didn't show any. It does, doesn't it? It says exactly the sort of thing that is exactly the sort of thing that you would say.
But that's the kind of corners that you push me in week after week. Oh, are they going to be a mess forever? Oh, are they going to win the league? Oh, they're not going to win the league. And then you write it all down, and then you bring it back up in late November.
Quite right. Yeah.
Right. What's the question? Can they sustain their push for the top four?
Well, no. Could they usurp Manchester City as Liverpool's closest challengers?
Yeah, well, they could potentially, be sort of second in the league in a bit of a close pack. But I don't think they're going to challenge Liverpool for the title. They're far too inconsistent for that. And I know maybe recent results suggest otherwise, but I think that will be proved over the season with their dodgy defence, dodgy keeper. I think they'll level out slightly. But in terms of the top four, they may run out of challengers over time. I don't think Brighton will quite sustain the levels they're at now. Tottenham are sort of hilariously inconsistent. Forest have dropped down. Villa issues with sort of managing fixtures and their squad this season. So yeah, there's a clear path there for a top four finish, which I think would be a bit of a success story given the mess they were in at the start of the season, given Maresca's in a new job. But yeah, I like the way that Chelsea sort of aren't just relying on Cole Palmer now. You know, it was all about him for the majority of last season and also parts at the start of this season. But others have really stepped up. Madueke had a really good start to the season. Obviously got a hat-trick against Wolves. Fernandez was one who stepped up last week. Caicedo a couple of weeks ago. Jackson, Neto's had a couple of really good games. You know, they've got a number of match winners in their squad, which makes them capable of beating any team in the league, which makes them very dangerous. I don't think the consistency is quite there. Like I said, certainly defensively. But yeah, they've really impressed me. They've done a lot better than I thought they would.
Let's deal with the Arsenal side of things then. And we'll check in with the Athletic's Amy Lawrence, who was speaking on Handbrake Off. Arsenal go to West Ham this week, but they set themselves up for that visit to the cauldron that is the London Stadium by beating Sporting Lisbon 5-1.
We came out of the trap so quick, didn't we?
Well, this is it. I think speed is the key. The speed of pass, the speed of movement, the speed of thinking. Those kind of angles, it's dizzying. Like a kind of souped up pressing machine from the first seconds, and there was 4 of them hunting in a pack. But what was great is that they then didn't take their foot off the gas at all, and they continued with that sort of super press. And the energy levels, the hunger. It looked to me like here's a team that have suffered a bit this season in a way that they've found really frustrating. And they're using that and channeling that in the best way possible.
So do you think that this turn in form that Amy is speaking about then, and maybe not just form, but approach and just feeling a little bit more energised, is going to come at the right time for Arsenal to just get them connected once again with a proper title race, Ollie?
I think the right time would have been probably 2 or 3 weeks earlier. The gap is a lot bigger than they would like. The margin for error has been pretty small in the Premier League over the last few seasons, and I think even in the Champions League, I would firmly expect them to go through, but they have left themselves with a bit of work to do with that defeat in Milan the other week. So I feel like I looked at Arsenal's run of fixtures a couple of weeks back, and I thought they've got a really tough run. It's not going to get any easier for a few weeks, and it didn't. And then you looked at the next, the run that started at post Chelsea, which was Forest, then Sporting, then West Ham, then Manchester United, Fulham. And look, it's not an easy run, but I think it's a lot lighter than the run that they'd had over the previous sort of 3 or 4 weeks, 4 or 5 weeks. The suspensions seem to have stopped as the silly red cards have stopped. The injuries seem to have eased up a bit. Odegaard coming back. I would expect Arsenal to be in a much better position by the end of the year, by the start of January, than they are now. I don't see them dropping an awful lot of points between now and then.
So it'll be interesting by the end of this weekend how the title race looks, and we'll see if we've got those 4 teams still sort of going hammer and tongs, Liverpool, Man City, Chelsea and Arsenal. We'll see how the dynamic has changed. And then obviously the main subplot to those chasing the top 4 this weekend, obviously we've got Brighton in 5th. They take on Southampton in that Friday night football. But then whether Tottenham can follow up their victory against Manchester City, and all credit to them. I got a little bit of criticism from Tottenham fans after last week's episode for me being light-hearted about the fact that they haven't won anything for ages. So I do apologise for that. But obviously they had their sort of reaction and their sort of inconsistent moment by drawing in the Europa League. Do you see them just clicking back into gear and reaching the levels that they reached against Manchester City against Fulham now, Tim?
I mean, it depends what you mean by clicking back into gear, really. Clicking back into gear would mean losing to Fulham, I think. Their results are even for Spurs, their results are just remarkable. I mean, beat Man United away, lost at Brighton with that crazy game, beat West Ham, lost at Palace, beat Villa impressively, lost at home to Ipswich, and then produced what was probably one of their best Premier League performances and results ever at City last week. So, what next? No idea, to be honest. I mean, obviously they were magnificent at City. They were helped out by some questionable soft defending, but I thought with Bentancur out and with Bissouma, his replacement, getting a yellow card after 15 seconds, and then with bringing Maddison into midfield, moving Kulusevski away from the position where he's been so successful this season and pushing him out wide. I mean, all credit to Postecoglou. It's a bit of a genius team selection, to be honest. But yeah, what next? They're so Jekyll and Hyde. They're so hot and cold that it's impossible to predict what's next. But if they were to find some consistency, I've said on the show before, they're almost as good as anything in the league when they're at their very best. So that's the conundrum for Postecoglou now, who hasn't been helped by the fact that Vicario is out for a few months. Probably the one player, just about the one player in that squad that you really don't want to be without for a prolonged period of time, because there is just no replacement in terms of what Vicario offers, with his feet, which of course is so important to the way they play. Fraser Forster is not going to be that natural replacement. So again, like I was saying last week, with a doggy in poor defensive form and there's no natural replacement for someone like him, it's the same with the keeper. I'm surprised they haven't addressed it in the summer. It's not like Foster's a new keeper who they're sort of getting to know. They know what his strengths and weaknesses are, and they've gone into the season happy with him as the backup. So that might be a costly decision.
I'll come on to the bottom six in a moment, but let's just check in with the situation at Manchester United. That's another subplot of the weekend. Ruben Amorim's first home game in the Premier League in charge of Manchester United after that 1-1 debut away from home at Portman Road last week against Ipswich. Here's Laurie Whitwell on Talk of the Devils about that Højlund performance against Bode Glimt, which got them a victory in midweek.
I was really pleased for him because there's a lot of focus on him. He's 21 and, I've doubted, is he going to be good enough to be United's number 9? But he's asked for the shirt, he's got the shirt, and I think he obviously has that confidence. But there's a lot of focus on him because United just don't score that many goals. 58, 57 in the Premier League in the last 2 seasons. He'd only scored 2 so far this season. But I just thought that was a really intriguing and encouraging performance from him. And in this system, right, he's played it at Atalanta, he says, so it's not that alien to him. It is different what he's doing now than what he was doing under Ten Hag. He says the pressing is different, he doesn't have to look over his shoulder as much. So if he's just sort of focused on getting into the box in the right areas, running the channels as you say, then surely that's going to make him a better player.
Big weekend for Manchester United this weekend. Obviously they're 3 points off the top 6, and I guess that the main plan, Ollie, for Ruben Amorim is just to at the very least finish above 8th where they were last season, but ensure that they're in that European conversation. And do you think that they are capable of doing that and putting a decent run together?
I do, yeah. I think I wouldn't go crazy about how good this Man United squad is, but I think it's a lot better than they've shown so far this season, better than they showed the whole of last season. They've got enough match winners and potential match winners, I should say, and enough good players, competent players to, I think, maybe not top 4, but top 6 certainly. They really should be. They really should be in that area. I think there are a lot of teams of sort of very similar level in terms of so even now you look at the gap between them in 12th place, or you look at West Ham in 14th place, only 4 points separating them and Tottenham in 6th. It's and only another 4 points again to Manchester City in 2nd. So the gaps in this Premier League table feel very small. You could fall a long way or rise a number of places if you just sort of turn a couple of wins into draws into wins. So it's I feel United should be capable of pushing. Yeah, I really do, and I think getting Højlund scoring goals is really important. I agree with everything Laurie said. you looked at the money they paid for him last year, and it seemed excessive. It seemed a hell of a punt to kind of put him in, make him Manchester United's number 9 when he basically had half a good season at Atalanta, and that was it in terms of his sort of top record or top level, top league performance record. And but I do see something with him which makes me believe he can click, he can get it right, he can develop, which I haven't always been so optimistic about some of the players Man United have signed in recent years. He does seem to have the raw attributes to score goals if they can start producing, creating chances and getting him in the right areas. I think his struggle so far has been a symptom of the team struggle rather than the other way around. So I think if the team starts performing better, I think we'll see him score more goals.
I'm going to end the show by crossing to our relegation correspondent, Tim Spears. But maybe I shouldn't call you that anymore, because Wolves, the cream of Gary O'Neill's stewardship, rising to the top now, up to the heady heights of 17th, out of the relegation zone, highest position of the season so far after winning 4-1 at Fulham. Matheus Cunha, he is one hell of a player, isn't he? 6 goals in 8. I suppose the big question is he going to get the hell out of there and go to a better club, Tim?
Come on, I've been waiting all season for this. You come to me week after week. Oh, how awful are Wolves? How long's Gary O'Neill got? Finally, we have a great win. Oh, how long is it going to last though, Tim? Well, Cunha's not going to stay for long, is he? I mean, he'll definitely stay to the end of the season. There's absolutely no way that they'll move him on in January. They're not that type of club, and also they can't afford to lose him. Obviously, he's great. Obviously, I'm extremely biased, but I think he must just be fun for everyone to watch, right? Because he just clearly loves playing his football. He plays with a bit of a free spirit. I mean, it's a massive turnaround from a year ago. People will forget how awful he was for a while and didn't look like a goal scorer at all. So full credit to him and Gary O'Neill, excellent manager, who's managed to coach the best out of him. I mean, his goals last week, the first one was obviously classic Bergkamp, the way he sort of takes the long ball out the sky. Second one was more, I don't know, it was a bit Hazardy maybe, or maybe a bit Salah, the way, just that first time curler into the top corner. Oh, so good. So good. And it's the Gary O'Neill derby this weekend home to Bournemouth. And I'm feeling a bit more confident about the future now.
I'd just say Wolves have scored 20 goals in 12 games. I mean that's two fewer than Manchester City, 1 fewer than Arsenal. It's impressive. Not so impressive the defensive record, which I think is the worst in the league. But they to me have the firepower, the quality to
Yeah, if they continue on that goal-scoring trajectory, they'll score 63 goals this season, which no team outside the top 7 managed for the whole of last season. So basically, if we continue on this goal-scoring trajectory, definitely going to stay up. That's my prediction.
I think it's going to be an interesting relegation scrap overall. And you look at this weekend, opportunities for Ipswich at Forest, considering how Ipswich are playing at the moment. Palace will quite fancy taking some points off Newcastle after Newcastle's slip against West Ham. It's going to be difficult, which is a new word, difficult, to work out who's going to go down this season. Tim,
what was the question? Who's going to go down?
How difficult is it?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. No, I just think that it's going to be an interesting one, considering Everton are going to potentially lose points this weekend. They're only 2 points off the drop. It's a lot tighter, a lot more interesting than it was last season. Yeah,
and now's the period where it becomes difficult to make decisions about managers. I mean, Russell Martin surely can't have long left. If they're more than 5 points adrift that they are now, then Southampton have got a big decision to make there. We've talked about he was hired for his particular identity, but obviously, if they're very likely to head to relegation, do they make that change now, or do they stick with him and look to come back up next season, etc.? Everton, new owners coming in. Sean Dyche probably looks the most vulnerable at the moment. And then Ipswich are recent improvements, and obviously Leicester have made the call to get rid of their manager, despite the fact that they're not in the relegation zone. So, I think certainly Palace, Everton and Southampton will be looking closely at results over the next few weeks in terms of whether they make that change ahead of the January transfer window.
Tim, Ollie, thank you very much indeed for your company today. Thanks very much as well for the kind comments on the documentary which we released last weekend on Sunday, Sudan, Football and the Forgotten War. You can still listen to that. Thanks for listening, as always, for watching on YouTube. Back on Monday. Have a great weekend.
If you want to watch more episodes of the show, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season. If you'd like to listen to the episodes in full in audio form, search The Athletic FC wherever you get your podcasts from.